Okay, so I thought we'd just start with some sitting. For those of you here last night, we're just going to sort of start the day off with some more of this handshaking practice I introduced. Then we'll just move through the day like that. My idea is, since we have 4 hours, we might as well use our day for practice, right? As well as some sort of more Dharma information, and really getting my feeling on half days is really, this is our opportunity to, like I already said, practice, but also to really deepen our understanding. And sometimes understanding deepens through conversation, through discussion, through sort of dialoguing. So really, if as questions come up for you, as experiences come up, feel free to write them down if it's not a Q&A time, and then in the Q&A time we can talk about it. So for me, it's kind of it's not so interesting just if it's going one way, like a college lecture or something like that. So some communication is good, right? Or as one Buddhist teacher says, some constructive miscommunication is good. He says there's no such thing as communication. There's only constructive miscommunication and unconstructive miscommunication. It's a very Buddhist thing to think about, actually. Anyways, maybe we can get into that, why that's the case. That's not immediately relatable. Okay, so let's sit for a minute. So feel free to find a posture that's relaxed yet alert, and just as I did last night, I'll kind of weave the intention for today into our practice as we start. So just coming into a posture that's relaxed yet alert, mainly keeping a straight back, feet planted firmly on the floor. You can choose to keep your eyes closed if you like, or half open if you like, whatever feels comfortable. We'll just spend a moment just settling back into the body. So as we talked about last night in our talk on resilience and happiness, the first place, actually, our home that we come into when we meditate, actually is the body. For traditional Buddhists, this wasn't always explicitly taught because people were already in their bodies. For many of us, we're not. We're very much in our thought rumination, very much in just getting caught up in our anxieties or stresses. So for us, it can be very helpful as modern meditators just to allow some space to come in. So I'm not going to do a long body scan here, but let's just spend a moment just bearing witness to the body, connecting with the sensation of the legs, feet, sit bones on the cushion beneath us, or our feet on the floor if we're in a chair. Just spend a moment connecting with the breath as well. So right now, we don't have to necessarily be bringing in anything profound or fancy or deep, just simply being with the body. Just becoming aware of the sensation in the body and just connecting with that experience, connecting with that raw sensation in the body, the feet touching the ground, the legs, sit bones on the cushion or chair. Just allowing that to be what it is. And within this is an acceptance of whatever's arising right now for you, just connecting with that. And so just allow yourself to come into the room and relax. But here, it's a little bit different kind of relaxation than when we come home from a long day and just space out or turn the TV on or scroll Facebook. Here we're coming into the body with awareness. So there's aware, watchful quality. So it takes a little bit of effort, but letting that awareness also be relaxed. We're not trying to bring in a different experience than we have right now. We're not trying to manipulate or control what that is. We're simply just being. And letting yourself take deep breaths as well. And in each exhalation, just letting go more and more into this sense of letting be. So as we meet the body, maybe we come into contact with sensations, feelings, emotions that are pleasant, or maybe some that are unpleasant, something uncomfortable, or something we don't want. Like often when I'm sleepy, when I need to be awake, I can resist that sleepiness. But here, if you're sleepy, that's okay. Be sleepy. But connect with that. Let the awareness just simply know the sleepiness in the body, what that feeling is like. Dropping the thought rumination and story about whatever you're experiencing, dropping that into the body. And so this in itself is also a practice. It's also a training, learning to relate to the experience of the feeling world as it is, rather than needing to bring in our conceptual ideas about it in order to understand or relate to it. See if you can relate to it just in this raw way, this raw sensation, raw feeling, raw emotion. And so I think it's clear by now, but really, whatever you're feeling is okay. There's no good or bad here. Of course, in the perspective of Dharma, we have thoughts that are more constructive, emotions that are more constructive, and ones that are more destructive. But sometimes when we just come in to being in the body and starting our practice, if we immediately start playing with that and pushing certain things away and trying to produce certain things, it can just wind us up even tighter than when we started. So there's almost a form of non-sectarianism we're having here towards our experience, towards our emotions. That whatever wants to arise, whatever wants to come can come. And we meet it with the kindness of non-judgment. The kindness of being willing to just be with it, be present. And this is not easy sometimes. If something is uncomfortable that's arising, or perhaps as we let be, there's a lot of fear of what may arise. As sometimes we're running from something, a life decision, a painful life experience, maybe a relationship to the body, relationship to any adverse experiences we're having within the body or emotionally. So see if you can just meet those with a very gentle awareness, a very gentle sense of knowing. But we're knowing now through feeling, not through knowing through thinking. It's a very different knowing. And just let be. And if relaxation comes, great. If it doesn't come, that's also fine. Just whatever's arising. It's completely okay. So in a way, we could say, and we'll talk about this as we move into today's topic, but it comes up in this meditation as well. In a way, when we have preference, we actually move away from the nature of reality. We move away from the nature of how things are abiding or how they are. We could say their ultimate nature. There's many sutras where the Buddha points this out. Even within the Sutra on the Four Noble Truths, when the Buddha talks about craving, going beyond craving, it's even referring to going beyond preference there. And then later in the Mahayana Sutras and in the Tantras as well, really gets explicit about what it means to have, for instance, in the Heart Sutra, an experience of no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sense perceptions, no preference. And so we're practicing that in a very direct way here, letting go of our preference for what our experience should be, and instead being with what it is now. Like I said last night, just relating to what's in front of us on our plate. So simply let the awareness connect with anything that's arising within the body, a sensation, a mood, an emotion. A deeper energetic resonance within the body. Like I said, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Just simply connecting and being with that. I often think of this practice a lot like relating to those parts of myself, those kind of small children that often sort of run around within my inner being. Anywhere from those that are very wounded, all the way to those that are confident and healthy. So within that room, I relate to whichever room of my body, I relate to whichever one is arising at the moment. And I really ask myself the question, especially when I'm having a hard time, how would I relate to myself if I connected with a very small or young version of myself? Just knowing now what I know, how would I treat myself? And how would I treat myself within the context of this practice, understanding the context of what we're doing and working with here? And I often get this feeling, not really a thought, but a feeling of just offering presence to those parts of myself, presence to that young version of myself. Just offering an ear, a sense of connection, that I'm willing to be with that young version, to be with that emotion that doesn't feel so right, or that anxiety that's arising, to be with that and alongside of it. This is really the essence of compassion. It's something we're born with, and we can always reconnect to, no matter how far away we've conditioned ourselves from that. But we have to drop the control and just be with that. Sometimes small kids, they don't respond to a lot of logical reasoning, like, oh, you shouldn't be anxious because of this, and this. It just doesn't make sense to them. So instead, we have to show them. We have to provide a space that's warm, that's secure, compassionate, connected. And there's something that starts to open when we're able to do this in our own bodies. When we're able to open to our own vulnerabilities, we open with awareness. That means we're not necessarily getting hijacked or caught up in it either. So it's a very fine space we're connecting with here. Neither indulging or suppressing, but we're still feeling. So it's not a cold observer, as sometimes what people think Buddhist meditation is. Not at all. Like I was saying last night, dukkha, or the nature of suffering, is something we have to come into contact with very directly, very intimately, if we want to stay clean in that. I almost get the image like it's a bunch of people rolling around in a mud pit, and these are kind of our experiences, our karma, our habitual patterns, our states of mind. And if we want to stay clean in the beginning, it's a little bit disconnected. We're already in the mud pit, so we might as well notice we're in the mud pit. Not having the unawareness or arrogance, thinking we can somehow observe suffering in some clean way. So what does that feel like to connect with whatever's arising for you right now? And just be. Whatever it wants to move, express. Just being aware of that and feeling. And so indulging doesn't mean we're not feeling it. Indulging means we get so caught up that we ruminate in story after story about whatever is arising. And so for some of us, when we're feeling in this way, we also may not feel much. Some people end up connecting more with a numbness. It's okay, feel the numbness. Also, if you're just bored, feel the boredom. What does that feel like? But there's really always something to be with. There's always some sensation in the body. It's not always an emotion, but there's some energies moving through the body. Like when I often get up to teach, there's always a little bit of sort of anxiety, a little bit of wondering how it's going to go. And so I just connect with that in the body, without shame. This is what it is right now. This is what's happening for me. I don't have to personalize it, but I also don't have to deny it. So after some time, in connecting in this way, we're not trying to produce anything necessarily, dropping our attachment to outcome, but calmness and ease might start to arise, and over time, even a sense of inner deep well-being may start to arise. And this well-being is not something that's produced from something else or pushing something out in order to bring a good feeling in. It's just simply coming into our own inner sense of contentment, our own inner sense of value and worth that's beyond having to prove that worth or having to produce something in order to be worthy. We're just simply worthy by the very fact that we're born, the very fact that we're a human being. As I talked about last night, this is an inherent quality of our Buddha nature. In one way, the Buddhist path is all a arrow or a finger pointing to that purity of our Buddha nature. It's all an elaborate play, an elaborate theater, trying to get us to wake up to that. And of course, sometimes we have to go through lots of different practices, lots of different accumulations, prostrations, chants, making offerings, sadhanas, analytical meditations. But all of these are to uncover, are to ripen our very potential of Buddhahood. And if we didn't have that potential from the start, there would be no point. We might as well just go have fun. So I feel this practice is quite powerful and that has this hidden potential for just opening us up. First, connecting with our embodied experience, connecting with whatever emotions are arising or will arise, whatever traumas need to be connected with in the body. But from there, if we can open into an inner spaciousness, a sense of openness that is willing or available to whatever wants to arise, we start to see our samsaric patterns more clearly. We start to see the overlay of concept, overlay of our karmic habitual patterns. And it doesn't mean they'll disappear right away. It just means we don't have to fight them all the time. And then when we apply shamatha, when we apply analytical meditation, when we apply vipassana, there's a connection. It's like a fire that can really get going strong. So from here, and whatever we've been connecting with so far, just allowing to be, we're going to bring in now a reflection practice, using the thinking mind in a constructive way. Just reflecting on what we've been sitting with, whether it's something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And starting to broaden our view of the world, those around us, and that we're not just a world of one. And so this vulnerability we're connecting to in the body, can we start to open that up as a reflection recognizing and putting ourselves in the shoes of others. Maybe starting with those around us, either in the room here today. Actually, I prefer that if you can do that, because sometimes it can connect us to others in the room. But of course, you can choose close ones, friends, family. And so we're starting to let the compassionate presence we've been bringing to our own experience, especially our own felt experience, we're starting to expand that to include others. So when our judgment is lessened or loosened, how do others appear to us? When we're coming more and more into our own inner contentment as well as inner simplicity, and when we start reflecting on what others go through in their lives, all of the emotional ups and downs, all of the suffering of sickness, age, eventually death. And for those of you who have studied Buddha Dharma to a certain extent, just recognizing the endless qualities of samsara, the endless circling within samsara, from birth to birth, from moment of gross suffering to subtler forms of suffering, sufferings of mind, emotion, just pervasive suffering that's always available to happen, or that's always a possibility. So see if you can connect this into more of a communion between either you and another or you and a group. I tend to sort of start with a few people and then expand that out into a wide circle, including all sentient beings. Just recognizing I'm not higher or lower than anyone. And the worth and value I feel for myself, I start to feel for them. The confidence in my own inner Buddha nature and my potential for awakening, I also start to see in them. There's a wonderful expression that I heard a teacher say once where they said, when Buddhas look at sentient beings, they don't see poor, suffering, sort of pitiful beings. They see Buddhas. What is it like if we see people in that light? And right away, if something arises for us in connection with that, bodhicitta is right there. Because we recognize also right now, we're not awakened. We have more work to do. But we recognize that others are valuable, and we want to awaken for them. Forming just these two aspects of relative bodhicitta. The wish to awaken and the wish to do that in order to benefit sentient beings. Not just one sentient being, but all. As vast as space, infinite, inexhaustible. And so our motivation, our intention we're cultivating here is also inexhaustible. So just thinking in that way, I think that whatever practice, discussion, learning, reflection we engage in today, may this really be aimed at this. May it be aimed with bodhicitta at awakening for the benefit of all. Okay. Get our tea in. I love green tea. It's like the best because it wakes you up, but you don't get jittery, you know? I was telling this story of Bodhidharma yesterday. I think the story is that Bodhidharma was, the Indian saint was kind of the founder of, this is where Zen Buddhism more or less came out of. That he was having trouble staying awake while he's meditating, so he cut his eyelids off, and then that became tea. That's the Chinese myth of how tea kind of happened. But I'm sure they have way older myths than that, how tea happened. Anybody heard that before? Is it just me? Yeah. So, what I thought we'd do is just do a few preliminary chants. So I don't know if people have chant books here. Just with refuge and bodhicitta, so it's in probably just the general, in the gold book, yeah. I think so, yeah. Yeah, the prayers before teachings. Feels better, no? When you come into the room and you kind of allow some connection, yeah. Everybody, I think it's a Saturday, so everybody's pretty relaxed in general, but it helps. At least it helped me. Maybe it was more for me than you. Thanks. Okay, so on page 34. So I think most of you are familiar because you come to the center regularly, but usually just before Buddhist talks, we kind of prepare the mind through some chants of taking refuge, generating bodhicitta. We already generated bodhicitta, but we'll do it more formally through the chant here. Meditating briefly on the four immeasurables through recitation, the 7-limb prayer, and then a short mandala offering to request the teaching. Everybody got it? Okay, page 34. So we'll do it in twice in Tibetan and once in English, the refuge and bodhicitta. Sangye chodan soygi chonam la janchu bardu dadi gyapsu chi dagi jin soygi pe sonam ki Drola penshir sangye drupar shog Sangye chodan soygi chonam la Janchu bardu dani kyamsu chi Dagi jin soygi pe sonam ki Drola penshir sangye drupar shog I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all beings. And we'll do the four immeasurables once in Tibetan and once in English. Senchen tamche dewa dang dewe gyudan dempar gyurchi Semchen damche dunga dan dunga gi gyudan rawar gyurchi Semchen damche dunga me pe dewa dang mi rawar gyurchi Semchen tamche nirin shadan nidan rawe tanyam nepar gyurchi May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Gosum gope gone chaksa lo ngo sham yu tru chu trin trin lubun tome ne sa di tun tam chi shang kya pan ge wa nam na je yi rang korwa ma tun bar du lik ju ne Drola chuki korlo korwa dang da zhenge nam jamchub champur go. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined, to clear all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Saji Puki Juchi Meto Cham Rira Linji Nide Gyampa Sangye Jingdu Mete Wargi This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ramna Mandala Kamnira Tayami. 우리 중에 노자섬 배만 개설 넘어나 염선 중에 어렵네 편만전에 셔서라 고독한로만 먹을 개개지수나 저게 진행 남셔서서 그런 배만 쓰리 오면 저기 인에 버렸네 도삼상이 고행원에 라서 저건 어떤 세파 사회나 메샤나 소와든 받은 사회나 많은 것이 나게 지원을 배만든 쇼나 저만만 빠르다 봐주니까 구선덕이 인원으로 살도 sol. So again, just refreshing our bodhicitta motivation. That in order to free all beings, I must become awakened, and therefore I'll engage in listening, contemplating, and meditating on the Buddha Dharma. Okay. Thank you. So we'll probably take a break every hour or so for a few minutes. Maybe we'll go a little longer now, maybe till 1:30 or something like that. We'll see. But I'll try not to make you sit forever for those of us sitting cross-legged. So the topic today, really making life meaningful. Obviously, I'm going to talk on this from a Buddhist perspective and what's meaningful from a Buddhist perspective. And my idea is to go through a couple different practices, different perspectives, but just kind of a recap of last night may be helpful. And we can go from there. So what we really focused on last night was this practice of handshaking, as well as an understanding of the nature of suffering, the nature of how to relate to that in our lives, how the Buddhist path sort of frames that out as a beneficial way to find resilience, right? So normally we wouldn't think when we reflect on or think about suffering that creates resilience. Most people would think, isn't that kind of dark? Right? I don't know if that's going to create resilience. It might just bum me out and make me not want to go to work, right? From a Buddhist perspective, though, we're really looking at a dynamic version of how suffering appears in our life. And actually, we would say, as you know, sometimes these days it gets a little watered down as sort of more approachable, but I'll just say the most, probably the bad news first, which is Guru Rinpoche Padmasambhava has a quote where he says, no matter how much I looked throughout samsara and my experience and all of my perception and all of the world, I couldn't even find a pin's tip worth of happiness. Right? So Guru Rinpoche said this, and I think about that a lot, and it really fits well with the framework of how we talk about the nature of suffering in Buddhism. So, I didn't go into detail last night, but basically, we can talk about it as 3 types of suffering, 6, sometimes 9. But I think these 3 are sufficient, and really these 3 are talking about the more obvious ups and downs we go through: emotional pain, physical pain, getting sick, having to die. Those more obvious, what we would classify as suffering in the English language. But then it gets more subtle, where the word dukkha in Pali, it's a hard one to translate because it really encompasses so much. Because it's not just suffering from the English stance; it's also the dissatisfactory experience that we have throughout our lives, and it also includes even the so-called satisfactory experiences. And this is where it gets more tricky, because it also includes what the next level of suffering, which is the suffering of change, which is talking about when something we're enjoying something is pleasurable, something is maybe we could say beneficial or whatever. It's also in the nature of change. So any fixation around that experience is going to result in dissatisfaction, because it will change. For instance, very simple, straightforward things like just sitting here. I mean, I feel pretty comfortable right now, sitting cross-legged, but in a couple hours, probably not. So, the body changes. It doesn't increase in pleasure. It actually decreases. And similarly, Casey made a really perfect green tea for me. It's very good flavor, right? Not too strong, not too light. Thank you. So, but if I keep drinking this and she makes another one and another one and another one, at some point, the pleasure gets lost. It degrades, right? So this is one phenomena we really look at as a Buddhist practitioner. We really investigate, well, why is that? Why doesn't pleasure increase the more I engage with it, right? It's really in the suffering of change. Now, pervasive compounding suffering, the 3rd type, is a little more tricky to understand, but really it refers to the base of the 5 aggregates and sort of our karmic obstructions right now, so that anything within that fixed duality of our karmic habitual patterns is going to necessarily produce suffering. So that's the very bad news, right? Most people don't want to hear this, I didn't plan on saying it first, but I'm just kind of recapping last night. I grew up Jewish, so, usually the bad news can come first culturally. That's kind of how we are. We complain first, and then the good can happen. It's actually a very Buddhist... One of my teachers asked me one time, why are there so many Jews in Buddhism? And I said, it's because we're the chosen people. But that was kind of a bad joke. But then I said, no, it's probably like culturally it's okay to there's a lot of questioning culturally in Judaism and religiously, and also, complaining is sort of okay. So we're okay with hearing the bad news first, But I really don't know. So this pervasive compounding suffering is deep. It's something we really have to reflect on. It's not obvious. It's very hidden, actually. And then underneath that pervasive compounding suffering, we have the very root of all of this, the root of delusion, this marikpa, or misapprehension itself. This idea from Buddhist philosophy that every moment we're fixating on our identity, our experience, our perception, a thought, an emotion, we're misapprehending the situation, and therefore we suffer, right? So, it's bad news, but it's good news as well. Because it means, okay, if we're misapprehending something, then there could be a correct way to apprehend something, right? There could be another way that doesn't produce suffering. So we discussed that a little bit last night, and I think throughout the day I'll go into that again and again. But the first step can often be for us, sort of as modern meditators, if we don't have a connection to the body, and all of this just remains ruminating in our head as ideas and thoughts and philosophies, what good does it have? Really, this is a little bit controversial to say, but think about it. Has there been anything deeply transformative in your life that you didn't bring into a process of engagement that really involves your whole experience? not just thinking and ruminating on it, but it starts to transform your behavior. It starts to transform how we show up in the world, how we interact with ourselves and our emotions, our thoughts, right? Our speech. And of course, Dharma does that. When we study Dharma, that's the point. So if, the point is when you study about renunciation, it should transform your mind. When we study the nature of suffering, those 3 types of suffering, it should actually transform how we relate to the world. But for some of us, there's a sticking point because there's too much thought rumination going on, right? So this is kind of a cultural barrier that I usually talk about. I don't always talk about it first, but since last night's talk was more around this, I thought to recap it a little bit today. And so the practice we just did, for those of you who weren't here last night, that was also what we did last night, and I'll introduce that more today. And it's really a practice of connecting awareness into the world of feeling, into the body and what's happening now that's not thinking, that's within this world of feeling. Because normally we have this overlay, and I'm not saying this, I'm very much generalizing, so this is something individual that you'll have to think about. Normally we have this overlay of an experience of the world mostly through concept, because it's how we're educated in this country, it's how we talk to each other, it's how we frame experience, it's how our opinions, beliefs come about. Yeah, and I'm not saying this is unique to modern people. Of course, all human beings throughout time have both a thinking, feeling, all of that, their entire experience. But when the thinking gets overemphasized, what happens is the connection to body, the connection to emotion, the connection to this world of feeling degrades and reduces. And this can create another obstacle, right? So as Buddhism has moved from country to country, it always has adjusted to what the needs are of that culture and what that country is. And, we're going through some growing pains right now of what that means here, because often it's easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater and sort of, I really have a question, this is definitely, I don't want to open a can of worms, but what culture in America is Buddhism going to integrate with, It's an interesting question because we don't have a singular culture. We actually have more of a culture of hyper-individualism and materialism. So Dharma is not really going to, I don't think it's going to, if it integrates with that, I think Dharma will lose. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was very adamant about this. He talked about, I think the first book he really published in the West was Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, right? In order to it was a very deep recognition of our unexamined materialistic framework and beliefs and structures, right? Not that materialism, I think, is just a samsaric problem. It's not a Western problem or a modern person's problem, but it's been increased, right? As we all know. It's sort of the modern predicament. Really good articles now are coming out more and more how it's actually when they measure well-being in people, that's also reduced the more the materialism increases. But anyways, I'm not here to talk about social politics. But either way, so this practice of handshake is really a really profound method, like I spoke on last night. For me, for a lot of years, I tried to sit on the cushion and force my mind to be focused or to meditate on emptiness or whatever it is. And some of that worked, some of that just takes, the nature of Dharma also is it takes time. It's not immediate. So you have to just put in your time on the cushion. But always underlying was an agitation, an unsettledness, a sense of discontentment, a sense of hollowness within me. Until I started to connect with this handshake practice more. And then if we've already studied Dharma, it's wonderful because they can go together. We could even motivate with bodhicitta. Hey, I need to also be a healthy human being in order to grow my bodhicitta, in order to grow my realizations of emptiness. I mean, this is the big question now, Sometimes in traditional Buddhism, the emphasis is not on healing. I mean, that word isn't, you don't really see it in Buddhist sutras. And the emphasis is not there because mostly when you're talking about pre-industrial cultures, they had a connection to the body. They weren't cut off from that. And I don't think this was just, Asian or African or non-European cultures. I think Europeans also had this, right? And they probably still do to a certain degree. But when we go into a system that prioritizes materialism and prioritizes the thinking mind, we slowly get cut off from feeling. right? So if you notice yourself getting bored while hearing this, it's a good sign. Maybe it's too much in the thinking mind, right? Because we might not have a connection. It's just hard to even have a reference point of, oh, what is he talking about, right? I'd rather just hear some complicated things, like really awesome things on emptiness. Sure, that can come. Like, that's not a big deal. That's like, I don't know. At a certain point, it kind of, even a lot of philosophy and kind of intellectual jargon and, what do you call it? Hoop jumping, it's kind of boring. Because where's the liberation happening? The purpose of all this, Really, I could sum up today and we could all go to the beach. Making life meaningful is liberation, moving towards awakening from a Buddhist perspective. So is that happening? That's the question we have to keep asking ourselves as a meditator, as a Buddhist practitioner. Is that happening, or am I just building up a lot of empowerments, commitments, cool information, stuff to sound like I know what I'm talking about? And I'm not judging any of you. I'm talking about me, right? This is more of an admonition to me. I've been in that boat. I'm still in that boat. And so really this is the question we have to ask. Is the Dharma transforming me, right? Every day I think I wake up, and that's one of the things I think about. So really making life meaningful from a Buddhist perspective is the both the one side, the confidence of knowing we can liberate, the inner confidence that I can become awakened. I can definitely become enlightened if I work at it, right? And I put in the effort and the circumstances come together. That inner confidence, but also the soberness to recognize, where is my practice in this very moment? Where is my mind? Where is it going? Is my self-cherishing reducing? Is my compassion increasing? Is my wisdom increasing? Right? And so, again, Guru Rinpoche has a wonderful quote for this. Padmasambhava, right? Who said, he said, my view is as high as the sky, but my attention to karma and cause and effect is as refined as barley flour, right? So what he's saying here is, as our view grows, our view of the nature of reality, of emptiness, our view of just the Buddha Dharma as a whole, our conduct also shifts. Our conduct becomes more refined, more soft, more, it's hard to say this because compassion in Buddhism doesn't always mean gentle and kind, by the way. But I would say it becomes more a unification of wisdom and compassion. And so we have to look at the conduct. Am I being more ruled by my disturbing emotions, or am I aware of those and working with them? And this is a tough balance, these two sides of the scale, because often if we don't have enough healing, just in our connection to the body and enough, and the healing, I'm really talking about the healing of the pervasive hollowness and low self-worth that many of us experience within the culture here. So unless there's enough of sort of some basis there and ground of confidence, and really in Buddhism we're building a confidence in our inner potential to become awakening. To become enlightened. That's the confidence we're building. It's not a confidence in like, oh, I'm really good at this, or I can guide a really good meditation, or I can, I'm the best at my job, or the best in school, or whatever it is. I mean, those are nice things to feel, joy in, but not confidence. So anyway, so then the balance between that confidence and the soberness is really important in Buddhist practice. You can see this in many stories of Buddhist saints and many of their songs and prayers, Milarepa, I think, is a really good example for modern folks because he was pretty wounded, He wasn't like a healthy dude. I mean, after you kill, 10 or 15 people, I don't think your mind's going to be very healthy. And even to do that kind of act, it doesn't come from a healthy person. But you see throughout Milarepa's life story and all his songs of realization, wonderful things like one of my favorite quotes from Milarepa is my practice is to not be ashamed at the time of death. Things like that, which are very powerful for us. Just to recognize, what are we really doing here? Is it just this life and then done and then over? Or is it? Is there? Am I going to have to take rebirth somewhere else? Does the mind move on? And when that mind moves on, when the consciousness moves on into my next rebirth, what's happening? What are the mechanisms that are propelling it? What do I have to experience there? So making life meaningful from a Buddhist perspective, I would add a plural into that, making lives meaningful, right? And so it's sort of like, as we make life meaningful from a Buddhist perspective, everything I'm talking about here, we also make lives, plural, meaningful. Because the least we're trying to do is, what's the word? Create a good situation for us in our future existences. That's the very least quality. And at best, attain awakening, right? And move towards that. And this is a tough concept to get as Westerners. Again, due to unexamined scientific materialist beliefs, We don't generally, maybe at a Buddhist center it's a little easier to talk about it. That's why I'm talking about it. But generally, karma and rebirth is like, it's somehow become a debatable point nowadays in popular Buddhism. To me, I'm pretty shocked by that. Not because it's definitely dialogable, meaning, I don't know if that's even a word, but it's up for dialogue. It's up for reflection. No one's saying you have to absolutely believe in karma and rebirth, right? But that it's debatable as a Buddhist principle is a little bit funny, It's a little bit going too far, because it's obviously a Buddhist principle. But whether you want to believe it or not, that's another question. And that's up for exploration, right? That's what in the end of the day, is so rich within the Buddhist path, is we're meant to churn this stuff. It's not meant to just be talked at you or read in a book and then, okay, I'm a Buddhist, so now I should believe that. No. That's kind of like a very stupid way to engage things. The Buddha I don't mean to be offensive, the Buddha said that. He said, it's really a foolish person who doesn't examine these teachings. It's a very wise person who does, right? So we can see even directly from the Buddha's words, or so-called from the direct Buddha's words, this is our job, to churn on this. So I think a starting place in this confidence, because connecting with our own inner Buddha nature is really tough. It's sort of like saying, it's like, let me trying to think of an example. Okay, going back to my example during the meditation of, that we want to stay clean, but yet we're already in the mud. And we want to kind of pretend like we're not, right? But we have to kind of recognize that, and then that's the way we get out of the mud, or our current predicament in samsara, or this cyclic existence, or this round of suffering that I was explaining. But it's sort of like a bit tricky with Buddha nature, because it's like someone comes and says, okay, you have this quality, we call it Tathagata or Buddha nature, this quality that is the very seed or potential for awakening. So in the Sutrayana path, they talk about it more like that. It's a seed or potential. In Tantrayana, it's like, no, it's there. It's not just a seed or potential. It's the underlying nature of your experience, if you can recognize it and familiarize with that, right? And there's different perspectives on that in Tantra as well. But my point here is, for most of us, when we first hear that, myself included, it's sort of like you're in the mud and someone's saying, no, you're clean. Right? But you're looking at your body and it's full of dirt. It's full of mud. And you're like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm completely covered in mud, right? So it's sort of like that situation where our lamas are trying to, our lamas and more realized beings who we're still fortunate to have and, to connect with, because they're examples of where the Dharma can lead as a human being. They're kind of saying this, and then it's kind of shocking, because it's like, I don't believe that. I'm this pitiful person who's, moping around all day and, feel like I can't do a job right, or whatever it is, Or the flip side of that, I'm the best, and we're more in the arrogant side of what things are, the prideful side. But this can be a tough place to start in, because it's tricky, right? Because we're saying, the window is the window. It has always been the window. It never has not been the window. It will never be anything different than the window, no matter how much dirt and mud and gunk and crap gets caked onto that window. It will never be anything but the window. And this is something that intellectually we kind of come into a question about, or a churning, or a reflection. But as we meditate, as we do our work in meditation, we actually come into connection with that Buddha nature. And in some ways, it might not seem as far off as in the beginning. For instance, like one way we can sort of connect, not exactly with Buddha nature, but we can infer the Buddha nature, is when we meditate. Just simple shamatha meditation, on the breath or something like that. And when the thinking mind calms, we see, I'm not the thinking mind. Because if I was the thinking mind, it would be there all the time, right? And similarly, when we handshake, the practice we were just doing, when we do the handshake practice, we see, I'm not the emotions either. Okay, these are happening to me and they don't feel comfortable all the time, but I'm not exactly the emotions. Similarly, when we look at the body and the body's changing over years and, maybe parts are falling off or whatever, we see, I'm not exactly the body either. So what am I, right? So we start to open up our perspective here. And so then there's a quality of, there's still something perceiving. There's still something, there is an experience happening, right? So what is that experience? And so we look into that more and more through meditation. So even just getting maybe just into a simpler, just the first example I said. So when the when the thinking mind sort of, when we have a little space from that in meditation, this is also alluding to our Buddha nature. Not that Buddha nature means it's always without thought, but it is alluding to it. So what I wanted to get into is this is good to think about, and we can talk more about Buddha nature throughout the day. But because it's so, it's like someone telling us we're not dirty when we're just in, like a pig in mud, basically, just rolling around, and someone's trying to say, no, you're actually clean right now. It's a bit difficult to connect with in the beginning. So what can be easier is just recognizing this opportunity we have, right? Recognizing this precious human life we have, which we often reflect on as the first reflection in the Lam Rim, right? In the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions, it's the first reflection in the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, or in Nundro, or the preliminary practices. And this is really just coming into an understanding of what we're actually working with here. And so I don't know about you, but I've gone through many periods in my life of thinking, kind of like, maybe it's kind of worthless. Like maybe this is all just for nothing, and this feeling of hollowness inside, this feeling of not an inner worth or confidence, more like I'm just kind of like a meat suit running around, having all these experiences. But from a Buddhist perspective, no, that's actually a big misapprehension, right? From a Buddhist perspective, especially now that we've met with the Dharma, and that we have this human body and we have all of our faculties here. We can study the Dharma. We can be supported in that study of the Dharma. It's really an incredibly precious opportunity. And so one of the first reflections we do is to meditate on that. So maybe we'll do a bit of that after a break. And then we start to reflect on, how can I use this? How can I make meaning from my life, right? And so we start to see, okay, so there are other people who were ordinary beings. If we read the Jataka tales of the Buddha before he was an enlightened being, and we read like Milarepa's biography or Yeshe Tsogyal or whatever the biographies were, or Machik Lobdram, we see, okay, people did this from being an ordinary being to being an enlightened being, right? And it's not something unattainable, and it's also not something necessarily out there. It's not something that we have to go to some heaven to find. We can be enlightened right now, right here, if we know how to do it and we practice, right? In our daily life. So this is, and then we chew on this enough to transform the experience. So this is what I'm talking about the difference between intellectual rumination and really the depth of feeling we bring out. So it's not just the idea, oh yeah, that's true, I have that. That doesn't help us that much, because underlying we still might have the deep self-confidence issues. We still might have the kind of inner unexamined belief in the body that we're not worthy, or that I can't do it. I don't know how I'm going to attain awakening. Sure, like maybe, the monks and nuns who come here or the lamas who come here can do it, but I can't do it. Look at your mind. Look, sometimes that's there. We don't have that full confidence. So meditating on our perfect human rebirth, on what we actually have, can be a really precious method. I thought I wasn't planning to talk on that so much today and meditate on, but today's my birthday, so I kind of thought it's really wonderful to talk about perfect human rebirth on your birthday and to kind of talk about what that is. Often we celebrate birthday as like a happy time, but it's actually 1 year closer to death. So it's kind of a funny thing to celebrate. Tibetans, they kind of all celebrate their birthday on the New Year. They don't have like specific dates. I think with Tukus they do, because they kind of keep track of their life a little bit more for biographies and stuff like that. But yeah. So maybe now just open it up to any questions before we do a break. We'll take like a 15-minute break or something like that. Yeah.
What came up for me while I was listening to you is like, we pretend we're not in the mud or in the illusion, and yet the seed, which is the Buddha nature, needs the mud or the illusion to blossom. Without it, maybe that's why we celebrate birth.
Yeah, I don't want to make an assumption why. I mean, I think different cultures celebrate birth for different reasons, right?
But I mean, if being in a body is not that wonderful,
yeah,
why is it a great opportunity to come back?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we would say yes. It's a weird thing because on the Buddhist path, it's full of paradoxes, and actually it's set up for that. There's a reason for that, because it's a path, because it's dualistic. Whenever there's something dualistic, there's always a paradox, always. And so, but the issue is we really have no choice, because we have nothing else to really work with right now. Like I said, Buddha nature, even as a concept, is foreign, let alone our actual experience of that or connection to it. So we would say Buddha nature is like an underneath, right, as a potential. And then as we water it, from a Suchana perspective, because it's causal, it starts to come out more and more. From a Tantric perspective, if we recognize it, the small piece of Buddha nature we're recognizing, its clear, empty quality, is not different than the whole thing. But it just takes time to evolve also from that practice or that side. But anyways, to talk about your question more directly. So yes, it's a paradox because we're in samsara, in our personal samsara, we're having this dualistic experience that's, we're experiencing karmic habitual patterns and results, and we're also producing new ones, right, all the time. But within the 6 realms of samsara, the 3 lower realms and the 3 higher realms, human rebirth is is pretty much the only one where you can attain awakening. Yeah. So there's the qualities there, just enough suffering to kind of get us off the couch, but just enough freedom and capability within the body and mind to attain freedom, to attain awakening. So that's why it's so precious. That's why we meditate on the preciousness of it. So it's a bit funny, and it's a bit of a paradox, because in the Lam Rim, I think it's quite smart. I mean, they arrange different Lam Rims different ways sometimes. So Lama Tsongkhapa was put the devotion to the teacher first, and culturally that works very well in Asian cultures and for at least pre-industrial and Tibetan culture. Some Lam Rim texts start with the mind. They start with first looking at the mind and analyzing what mind is, then move into perfect human rebirth. But Lama Tsongkhapa started with kind of Guru devotion and then perfect human rebirth. Guru devotion actually at its essence is very uplifting practice. It's very much uplifting, but it's also very difficult for us to connect with it culturally. So anyways, the first meditation is usually perfect human rebirth, more or less. And there's a reason for that, because we start to come into what we have. It's this recognition of this jewel of a body and mind, this more, I would say, this opportunity we have, right? Then later down the road, you also see, okay, but that it's an opportunity, it's not the result, right? Or it's not the goal. It's not what we want necessarily. So then it's the practices of meditating on the nature of suffering, especially the suffering of a human rebirth and our life and our experience. It's not meant to depress us. It's meant to disenchant us with merely getting stuck in this life's happiness. Because it's sort of like this. If we look at our lives, This is what I meant by becoming sober. This is all tough stuff, by the way. It's not easy. It's all very challenging to do, but worth it. But it's sort of like one of those practices of becoming sober is, and what I ask myself is, am I really looking for liberation, or am I still just acting like a person moving from one pleasurable experience to another? Because we could kind of look at our life like that, in the sense that I ask myself this, just a more direct question, which is there any experience I'm having right now where I'm not trying to seek pleasure or move away from or move away from something that's unpleasurable? And it's sort of like, as a human being, we tend to just stay in that dilemma, waffling back and forth, and there's all kinds of dramas around that, and miscommunications, and so it's a really good question to ask. And then we look deeply into the Buddhist path and we see, okay, well, that's my current dilemma, but I also have the ability to become aware. And awareness here is the key, because awareness is what interrupts the process. So we're going to focus on awareness maybe after the break. But meditative awareness is our first sort of tool in this battle for awakening, or this sort of process of awakening. Because as a human being, we have the components of body and mind, and those components, networking and working together in order to become aware of mind, to become aware of experience. And therefore we can have free will and choice. So free will is a really interesting question in Buddhism. So I'm definitely going off your question, but it's related. Yeah. Free will is tricky, because if everything's if we're propelled by karma in each moment, how much free will is there? But what we would say is, when we can become aware of mind, behavior, experience, that's when we have choice. And so the idea here is to produce more choice. And for many of us, that's first taking advantage of what we have, just seeing the opportunity of this human body, right? And not just any human body, one that's connected with the Dharma. So there is a difference. It's not saying 7 billion people have a precious human rebirth. It's saying certain people out of those 7 billion people. Usually we have it's like you have a list check, where you can check off of the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. So we study in the Lamrim, which I can go into if you want. But yeah, it's a good question.
Well, one, I have two, I guess. So really, if we're in the now, just in this moment, being here right now, when you're saying don't move, is there any experience that you're looking forward to be pleasurable, more pleasurable, more pleasurable? That's true for me.
Yeah.
Or aversion, which is generally something in the past for me. But I think the tools that we're given provide us an opportunity not to do that, to not move forward and back and focus on that, but just be here now. Is that correct?
Correct in the sense of will that produce
of a right view of looking at what you're saying?
It's part of it. I would say yes. I would say yes, and so really what we're also, because even the present moment, there's still a little bit of a problem, because there's a perceiver and there's a person there that is a misapprehension, right? A sense of someone experiencing the present. And so that someone who's experiencing the present, usually for most of us, is a kind of misapprehension, but it's a step in the right direction. So it's sort of like, again, we can look at the Buddhist path as progressive, in the sense that we're getting used to more deeper and deeper ideas that are taking us deeper and deeper into how the nature of things actually are. So if we're just caught up in our aversion and pleasure seeking all the time, and there's no presence, obviously it's we're lost. It's very difficult. So we kind of cultivate a presence. We cultivate a present moment awareness to just be aware of what's happening now. But meditation isn't actually just, meditative stabilization isn't just being aware of what's happening now. It's also being aware of the mind itself. So it's not what we're doing that we're being aware of. It's more the awareness itself. So I'll talk about that a little more later. But that's also still a tool. It's also still provisional. I haven't heard any lamas say this, but I was really thinking about, I want to check it with a few of my teachers, because it seems like, what we have in the Buddhist teaching is we separate some of the teachings into provisional and some into are interpretive and some into definitive. Like the Heart Sutra would be a definitive sutra because it's talking directly about how the nature of reality is. But from a perspective of relative reality, we can kind of say the whole path is provisional because it's conceptual until it's not conceptual anymore. And so eventually we have to move into insight practice, which is really, or vipassana, which is really pulling apart not only the attitudes and habits and behaviors that keep us stuck in the past and stuck in the future, but also the ones that keep us stuck in the present. So, we have, we would say a Buddha's enlightened mind is beyond the 3 times of past, present, and future, right? It's in what's called 4th time sometimes. They use that terminology. But what is 4th time? You can't say anything about 4th time. If you ask the Buddha certain questions, he would stay silent. So, yeah. 4th time's beyond concept. Yeah.
Then I have a really remedial. I know this is remedial, but it's happening to me right now.
Yeah.
I didn't sleep real well. In the meditation when we started, you were saying to, maybe take a little look at your plate and focus on something that was maybe bothering you right now, or whatever, a problem that you might be dealing with. And be compassionate and put yourself in looking at it a different way. Okay, when you do that, I don't, it's very difficult because I don't want to say who it is, but it's a family member that if I put myself in her shoes, then I'm losing everything that I already really believe in. I have to let go of what I really believe in to be the truth, to get into her shoes, because I know she's suffering and I'm suffering. But her view, I have no ability to change her view ever. So if I get into her shoes, what she would need me to do is get out of mine. And I'm locked up right now.
Yeah, I think in a very practical way, it's sort of more coming into, the main practice we were doing was bearing witness to the feeling as it is. So you could employ that practice in just bearing witness to what's arising for you, giving space for that, but not ruminating on it with a thinking mind, not trying to figure it out or, but just simply bearing witness in the body to the feeling, as long as that wants to be there, right? And you have no agenda with that. In this particular practice, the handshake practice, there's no agenda to change it or to try to meet her where she is or any of that. You're just bearing witness to what that is inside of you. But as far as more of the predicament you're talking about, yeah, that's the tough part. Is truth is a moving target. So truth is relative, more or less from this perspective of how we're discussing and that predicament. So. Yeah, that is the painful thing. How do we meet someone and put ourselves in their shoes in order to have compassion for their experience, but at the same time we're not denying our own experience, and we're not taking a hit for the team or becoming a doormat, right? So that's a tricky one. So that's why I think it's emphasizing this feeling-based practice a lot more, because that'll give space to work with your own experience, which is what you can work with. You can't control her or do anything. And in a sense, we're not controlling our experience either, but we are giving space for that. We're giving an ear. We're giving presence to experience what that is. And then perhaps through your own healing around it and your own sort of inner issues that are known or unknown, then at some point you'll be able to open up to her perspective. But that doesn't mean you have to believe what she's saying. You know, it's kind of like I look at someone like the Dalai Lama. You know, I mean, with his amount of practice and knowledge and depth of experience, you know, when he meets some of us, he's probably like, you know, it's like meeting a small child. You know, like if he met me, it's like, you know, it's like meeting a small child. But that only increases his compassion. It only increases his availability and willingness to reach out. It doesn't decrease his knowledge, or it doesn't decrease his experience. So compassion, actually true compassion, will increase our wisdom if we know how to engage it. But it's not by becoming a doormat either. That's what's pretty tricky with Buddhist practice, because again, these are cultural issues that I feel we face that were not necessarily Tibetans faced as much. I mean, they have different issues. You know, there's different cultural issues, but and I'm sure there's a lot of similarity to as human beings. So we have to become aware of this and then know how to adjust the practice, but also not be caught by the ego either. That's one thing that I think I'm exploring this a lot these days, more internally, but sometimes in dialogue with friends and other teachers. Is it feels to me a lot like we're sometimes Dharma is being manipulated to fit our egos in the West. You know, which and it's not like, that's not a criticism saying like it's not a philosophical criticism I'm making. It's more like a compassionate plea, because I feel bad for us individually because we won't get the result, right? We'll just stay in our ego. So that's a tough balance. How do we not tank our self-esteem more and sort of, it doesn't bring compassion to anyone, ourselves or the other person, but also how do we not stay sort of in this cocoon of ego clinging or self-cherishing? So Casey and I were talking about it in the car last night, so maybe we'll talk about it more after a break, but maybe you can remind me. But it's really important, you know, like in the Lojong teachings, like practices like Tonglen, I don't teach them very much unless I know the room is prepared. It's sort of given out easily now, but actually it's quite advanced practice, because you first have to have a very healthy base, pretty healthy self-confidence. Otherwise it'll go the wrong way, because then it's like, oh, you know, it can go into this area of I'm taking on the suffering of this being, and sort of we're putting ourselves down. That's not what the practice is. That's actually ego. Because ego can either be too much, like confidence in the wrong way, or arrogance or pride, or too little, and that's also ego, right? It's like the flip side of pride. So it's very tricky. So kind of when you told me that your truth was being challenged, the more, I think that's a good thing, actually. But as long as it's not tanking the compassion for yourself at the same time, right? That's what I would say. But it's kind of a good thing, because this is an issue we're having. Like, I actually like listening to different political views now, you know, personally, and different views on social structures and economic structures and stuff. Ones that I disagree with, because it really, like, it's a patience practice, first of all, and then it's also a way to be like, literally this person is living a different truth. And then it also makes it wonky. Where do I put my security in? Like, where do I find truth? And truth is a big one. Buddhism, that's everything we're talking about here. That dirty, clean thing I was saying, that's all about truth, right? The conversation is about that, because it's at a fundamental level. It's about what is our experience, and how is that creating liberation for us, or is it creating suffering? Where are we bound? And the fundamental bondage is actually in belief, in judgment. So Talopa, the teacher of Naropa, said, he said a few things, but one of the things he said was, it's not a perception that binds you, it's clinging, you know, a fixation to that perception. And then he also said, judgment is samsara. Meaning, like, the more we're judging, the more that's happening, the more we're going to be cocooned into our ego. And so we can almost say, like, truth is also samsara. It's a weird thing. Yeah. Anyways, I'd like to open this up. It's a little bit kind of, can go into too far into left field, but this is the things I like to think about truth and about the way we make meaning from that truth. But maybe we'll take a break because it's 1:30. So maybe let's just 10 minutes. She's going to put out some snacks, and then we'll come back in 1:40, something like that.